Snow bit at her ankles as Miriam stumbled behind the cart, clutching the frayed satchel tighter to her chest. Her fingers, red and raw, could barely hold on anymore. The wind carved through the thin dress like it wasn't there at all. She had stopped feeling the tips of her toes hours ago. The men didn't speak to her. They never really had. She wasn't someone to speak with, just about. "She's clean," one of them had said. "Widowed, quiet. She won't cause trouble. Not much use otherwise." She was property. Again. The Lakota man waited by the fire, arms crossed over a chest wrapped in deerskin, long braid resting down his back like a line of quiet defiance. He said nothing as they handed her over. He didn't nod, didn't thank them, just stared. Miriam didn't dare meet his eyes. She knew what came next. Inside the lodge, the heat made her dizzy. Cedar smoke clung to the air. Her skin trembled under the rough blanket someone had tossed over her shoulders, more like a tag to mark her as traded, not warmth meant to last. She braced herself. She'd done this before. First a boy too young to hold a plow, then a man too cruel to hold a heart. They had called themselves husbands, but had never called her by her name. Not really. She stood in the center of the lodge, arms at her side, eyes on the dirt, her jaw locked, waiting for the inevitable command. But it never came. Instead, the man knelt by the fire and poured warm water into a shallow bowl. She saw his hands, large, sure, but steady, not reaching for her. Not demanding. Just preparing. He dipped a cloth, wrung it out, then turned to her. "Your hands," he said, voice quiet. Not soft like weakness, soft like weathered leather, like a song hummed under breath. Miriam looked up, startled. It had been weeks, months maybe, since someone asked anything without taking. Hesitantly, she offered them. Blistered palms, cracked knuckles, filthy nails. He took them in his hands like they were something sacred. As if they mattered. "You can do what you want," she whispered, flinching as the cloth touched her wrist. "Just don't pretend I'm more than I am." He paused. "They called me a savage," he said after a moment, rubbing warmth into her numb fingers. "But I was taught to wash before touching anything sacred." Her throat closed, a knot of disbelief and shame swelling behind her ribs. "I'm not sacred." He dipped the cloth again, then gently cupped her hands. "You deserve to be seen." The words didn't come like a declaration. They came like a truth he'd known all along. She cried then. No warning, no drama, just tears sliding down, mixing with the warmth on her skin. He didn't move away. When he was done, he dried her palms and turned them upward, as if presenting them back to her. A gift she'd forgotten belonged to her. "You're safe here," he said. "You don't owe me anything but your name." For a heartbeat, she forgot it. Then, in a voice like ash, she gave it. "Miriam." He repeated it once, not as a label, but as a promise. Then he laid a blanket across the furs on the opposite side of the lodge and nodded. "Rest. You don't need to fear the night here." She lay down with her back to the wall, the blanket held to her chest like a shield. For the first time in years, she didn't expect footsteps in the dark. She whispered to the fire, as if testing the words, "I deserve to be seen." And for once, the night didn't feel like something to survive. It felt sacred. Miriam awoke before the light touched the canvas walls of the lodge. She didn't know what had stirred her, perhaps the stillness. The absence of barking orders, of footsteps crunching snow toward her. Her body, curled tight from years of habit, expected pain. It expected a man's hand, a voice too loud, a task too cruel. But there was nothing. Only the soft crackle of a fire's last breath and the sound of wind moving through the pines. She sat up slowly, the blanket still clutched to her chest. Her dress was wrinkled but untouched, her skin unbruised, her body still her own. The man, known, though she didn't know his name yet, was gone. The lodge felt cavernous without him, but not threatening. Only quiet, freeing, and terrifying in the same breath. What now? She rubbed her wrists. Once, rope had lived there. Now only faint scars remained, ghost lines of possession. The blanket fell slightly from her shoulder as she rose and stepped cautiously to the lodge entrance. He was returning, arms full of firewood and a bundle wrapped in deerskin. He said nothing as he entered. Just placed the wood near the hearth and unwrapped the food. Dried meat, cornbread, and something that looked like mashed berries in a hand-carved bowl. Then he set it between them. "Eat," he said. She stared at it. Not at the food, but the offering itself. It confused her more than hunger did. "You're feeding me?" He glanced at her, then back to the fire. I paid the trader to stop treating you like meat, he said. Not to take you as mine. Her stomach tightened. The words made sense, but her soul didn't know where to place them. She looked down at the food. Her fingers twitched. She hadn't eaten without fear in years. I don't understand, she said quietly. He sat across from her, cross-legged, hands steady as he picked up a piece of cornbread. There are names, he said. Slave, wife, savage. They lie when spoken with the wrong eyes. She chewed slowly, her hunger betrayed her reluctance. Every bite brought tears closer. Still, she didn't cry. Why me? She asked. Why do you care what happens to someone like me? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled from his pocket a strip of rawhide cord and began threading beads. Red, turquoise, bone. When I was 14, he said, they took my mother. Sold her. I never saw her again. Her throat closed. I'm sorry. He shook his head. I don't want sorry. I want no woman in my lodge to feel like she has to give her body just to be called human. That cracked something. She looked at him, heart racing, not out of fear, but out of something that felt like recognition. No one held up the cord, now half-threaded. This isn't a wedding thing, he said. Then what is it? It's a thing that says you're still you. Miriam reached forward. Her fingers brushed his, not trembling this time, and touched the beads. She didn't say thank you. Not yet. But she looked at him, not as a captor or savior, but a mirror. A man who saw something beneath her ash and silence. I don't want to be a shadow anymore, she whispered. He nodded. You won't be, he said, not here. And in that firelight, with food warming her belly and beads warming her palm, Miriam understood something she hadn't dared believe in years. She didn't just want to survive. She wanted to live. Not as a servant, not as a body, but as someone seen. The next morning, Miriam didn't wait for the fire to die or for no one to return. She rose before the sun, careful not to wake Caleb, and knelt beside the hearth on her own. She didn't know why she was up. Habit, maybe? Or the restless pull of a mind that didn't yet believe in safety. She reached for a piece of kindling, fumbling at first, then striking flint the way she remembered from girlhood. The spark caught, flickered, and grew. She fed it gently. The warmth reached her face, it felt earned. When the flap of the lodge rustled, no one entered with snow clinging to his braids. He paused, surprised to see her awake and seated beside the fire. She expected a correction. That's not your place, that's not your role, but it never came. Instead, he said, good fire. And then simply, your hair. It's full of ash. She looked down. Of course it was. She hadn't washed it properly in weeks. The soot from her first night here still clung to her, a reminder of how small she had made herself. I didn't notice, she murmured. I did, he replied. Let me help. She stiffened. Why? He didn't move closer. Because it's heavy. You shouldn't carry ash that isn't yours. That hit deeper than it should have. She blinked. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. Instead, she turned, slowly, deliberately, and sat cross-legged before the fire. No one knelt behind her, not touching her yet. Tell me if you want me to stop. She didn't answer. Not because she was afraid, because she wanted to know what kindness without expectation felt like. He dipped a cloth into warm water, wrung it out with care, and touched her scalp, just once. Then again gently, wiping in small circles, clearing the soot from her hair. His fingers never strayed, his hands never lingered. He cleaned, not claimed, and slowly the tension in her shoulders began to melt. Her breath came easier, her spine didn't flinch at every movement. It was strange, to be touched and not taken, seen and not judged, to sit still without having to brace for what came next. Why are you doing this? She asked. He was quiet a moment. Because someone should have, he said. She closed her eyes. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. Not yet. When he finished, he folded the cloth beside the bowl, clean again, as if the moment had been sacred. She turned toward him, her hair damp, her eyes wide. I don't know what this means, she whispered. It doesn't have to mean anything, he said. It's not a vow, not a promise. Just this moment. Just this morning. And for the first time in years, that was enough. Later, when Caleb stirred and crawled into her lap with his warm little hands, Miriam didn't pull away. When no one offered breakfast, she accepted it without suspicion. And when the wind howled outside, she stayed seated. Not because she was forced, because she wanted to be there. In a world where no one reached for her body, only offered warmth. Where no one demanded her loyalty, only gave her space. She had stepped into something unfamiliar, not quite a home, not quite a new life. but it didn't scare her. Not as much as the idea of returning to what had come before. She hadn't yet learned how to live. But she had learned one truth. This was the beginning. The days became gentler. Not because life had grown easier, but because Miriam had begun to breathe. She woke now, not from fear but from habit, stretching before the fire, checking on Caleb still curled in his furs. Her hands were no longer bound to silence. They reached instinctively for kindling, for bowls, for cloths, damp with morning dew. Each motion was small, but it mattered. She was learning. No one never hovered. He didn't instruct or expect. When she burned the first pot of stew, he quietly added more water. When she stacked firewood crookedly, he restacked it when she wasn't looking. And when she caught him doing it, he only offered a half smile, shrugged, and said, "Better foundation that way." He never corrected her with tone or hand, only with patience. That, more than anything, unspooled the tight knot inside her. The others began to notice too. An elder named Raya invited her to help dry herbs near the lodge. A young mother offered her a carved comb when she noticed Miriam finger-combing Caleb's curls. A girl no older than 10 brought her a rabbit's foot on a string and whispered, "For your son. My mama says it keeps bad dreams away." Miriam held it like treasure. She didn't speak much at first, words still felt dangerous in the open. But she listened. She smiled. She sat near, not behind. The camp had no priest, no council of men to assign roles. It moved in quiet rhythms, sharing food, mending hides, walking the river paths. No one moved through it like wind through trees, seen, felt, but never forceful. And so did she. Each night, as the fire died down and Caleb lay snuggled against her side, Miriam found herself staring at her hands. They were still calloused, still uneven, but not empty. They had carried wood, stirred stew, combed her son's hair. They had made warmth. Not begged for it. One afternoon, as she knelt by the fire and clumsily peeled root vegetables, she handed Noah a bowl. Their fingers brushed. She flinched, old instinct firing before thought. The bowl slipped and splattered stew across her dress. "I'm sorry," she gasped, pulling back. "I didn't mean to," but Noah only crouched beside her, dabbing the spill with the edge of his sleeve. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly. Her eyes filled. "I still think you'll change," she admitted, "into someone who wants to take what I didn't offer." He didn't argue. He only looked at her. Gaze steady. "Miriam," he said, "I was raised to believe the body is not a prize, it's a story, and only the one living it decides who reads it." The words wrapped around her like cedar smoke, warm, earthy, patient. "Then why do you keep looking at me?" she whispered, "like I'm already known." "Because I'm listening to what you say," he answered, "not what others left written on your skin." That night, Caleb fell asleep with his head on her shoulder, his little mouth half open in peace. Miriam didn't brace for footsteps. She didn't shrink into shadow. She sat by the fire, her body untouched, but her soul seen. And just before sleep claimed her, she realized she was no longer surviving, she was living. And every small choice she made, each time she stirred the stew, braided her own hair, or whispered Caleb's name like a lullaby, was a declaration. I belong to no one but myself. The sky was pale the morning she spoke her name aloud. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her breath fogging in the cold air, Caleb strapped to her back in a fur-lined wrap. In one hand she held the cedar braid Noken had given her the night before. Tight, fragrant, threaded with simple red twine at each end. Not a gift, not a chain, just a question left open. She stepped carefully down the slope toward the river, the snow packed beneath her boots, sunlight catching in glints across the white. And there he was, Noken, kneeling by the stream, lifting his fishing lines from the shallows. He looked up at her, and his gaze didn't ask why she was there, it simply met her where she stood. She swallowed hard. "Do you remember what I asked you the first night?" she said. He nodded. "You asked if I'd feed the child first, or beat you before." She exhaled. "That wasn't me," she said. "Not really. That was someone who thought being hurt was just what happened to women." He didn't move, didn't interrupt. "I told you my name was Miriam," she continued, "but that's not the name I whisper to myself. It's not who I was before I belonged to kitchens and closed doors." She stepped closer and held out the cedar braid. Her fingers trembled, but not from fear. "This was yours," she said, "but it gave me back the right to name myself." He didn't take it yet. He just looked at her, eyes calm, open, still listening. "Then tell me," he said, voice low, "what is your name?" She closed her eyes, let the wind pass through her bones, then opened them again, steady. Alandra. The word hovered between them, soft but unshakable. It wasn't a scream, it didn't need to be. No one stepped forward slowly, as if not to disturb the gravity of the moment. Alandra, he repeated, letting it fill the quiet. That name walks tall. She nodded, tears threatening but not falling. And I'm ready to walk with it. He didn't touch her, he didn't reach for her hand. He only stood beside her, close enough to feel his presence, but not pressing his weight on her space. Will you walk beside me today? He asked. Not as a wife, not as a burden, but as someone the fire can warm. She gave a breath of a laugh. Shaky, but whole. I'll walk, she said, because I want to. Not because I was told to. They turned back together, Alandra holding Caleb close, the cedar braid now tied gently around her wrist. When they returned to the lodge, the boy woke with a grin and ran to them, arms wide. No one ruffled his hair and reached for the kettle. I'll make the stew, he said. You made a name today. That's harder than gutting a rabbit. Alandra laughed, and it startled her. How light it felt. That night, she braided her own hair, not to please, not to hide, but to feel whole. And when no one laid his blanket beside hers, she didn't move away. Not from obligation, not from shame, but because, for the first time in her life, she had chosen herself first, and found someone who honored that choice. No vows were spoken, no fire ceremony lit the sky, just a woman, a child, and a man in quiet witness of something sacred. The name was hers again, and in speaking it, she reclaimed her life. The fire was quiet that morning. Alandra stood just outside the lodge, the air sharp against her cheeks. The world around her was coated in snow, but the sun had begun to rise, casting long gold ribbons across the clearing. Her fingers curled tightly around something cold in her palm. A ring, dull, dented, and worn smooth in places where her skin had tried to forget it. The inside was scratched, the same way she tried to scratch it off her hand once, when there had been no safe way out and nowhere to run. She had almost thrown it into the river the night no one gave her the cedar braid. But something stopped her. Not fear. Not nostalgia. Just the need to do it right. So today she stood in silence, staring at the fire pit where she'd learned to build warmth instead of bracing for it. Behind her, Caleb played quietly in the snow near the edge of the creek. No one stood just far enough to give her space, but near enough to witness, if she needed it. Her hands trembled as she knelt by the fire. She arranged the kindling, the dry sticks, the bits of birch bark Caleb had helped her gather. She struck the flint. Once, twice. The spark caught. She breathed in the scent of pine and charred memory. Then she opened her hand. This was never love, she whispered, her voice steadier than she expected. And she dropped the ring into the fire. It clinked once on the stones, then vanished beneath the flame. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just stood taller. Behind her, she heard no one approach but felt no pressure, no presence pushing into her space, just warmth, not from the fire, but from his quiet respect. You don't need a new ring, he said gently. She turned, eyes clear. I don't want one. But he continued, holding out his hand. If you ever need something to hold, something different, I'd offer you this. Resting in his palm was a braid of cedar bark, strong, flexible, earth-toned, with the ends bound in red thread. Not polished, not pretty. Real. She stared at it. It's not a bond, he said. Not unless you tie it to something. She reached for it slowly. I've never tied anything that didn't trap me, she said, voice barely audible. No one nodded. Then this time, tie it to something free. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she clutched the braid close to her chest. That night, she held it as she slept, wrapped in furs with Caleb's hand resting on her shoulder, no one steady breathing a few paces away. She dreamt of no fists, no doors slamming, no cold kitchens or tight-lipped prayers, only the river, slow, silver. A name whispered in the wind. When she woke, the cedar braid was still in her hand. Still hers, still whole. And when she stepped outside into the fresh snow, she tucked it into her braid, not as a symbol for anyone else, but as a quiet covenant with herself. She had burned the weight of what had held her down. Now she would carry only what made her rise. She turned toward the lodge and saw no one watching her, not smiling, not questioning, just seeing her. And she nodded once. Not for him, for herself. The past no longer owned her. She did. Alandra moved through the camp differently now. Not faster, not louder, but fuller. Her steps had purpose. Her hands no longer curled in apology. She did not flinch when someone called her name, because now it was truly hers. The cedar braid nestled against her scalp, woven into her hair every morning like a quiet oath. Not to no one, not to anyone, to herself. She belonged to herself first. She helped Raya stitch moccasins for the winter, her stitches still uneven, but improving. When the little girls from neighboring lodges asked her to teach them how to boil roots, she said yes, and laughed with them when the pot boiled over. Caleb played freely now, his laughter not frantic but joyful. He ran with the other boys, his wooden bear, carved by Noan, dangling from his belt by a leather thong. He came home with muddy hands and stories of snow forts and river stones that looked like turtles. He no longer slept curled into her out of fear, but because it was warm and safe and what love looked like now. One afternoon, Noan returned from hunting with 2 grouse. He handed one to Alandra and offered her his knife. "You clean this one," he said simply. Her eyes widened. You don't have to be perfect," he said, "but you're not a guest anymore." She nodded, her fingers trembling only slightly as she knelt beside the fire and began to pluck the feathers. A group of women sat nearby, sewing in silence. One of them, Raya, leaned closer and murmured, "It took me 2 seasons to stop cutting the meat wrong." Alandra smiled, a real one, not polite, not strained, just hers. That evening, the stew simmered over the fire, rich and fragrant. Caleb leaned against her shoulder, half asleep. Noan sat beside them, quietly carving another toy, this one shaped like a fox. There was no need to speak, but Alandra did. "I used to think quiet meant danger," she said softly. "That silence always came before someone took something from me." Noan's hands stilled. But this, she glanced around. The firelight, the steady breathing of her son, the man beside her who still hadn't asked for more than she gave. This quiet doesn't feel like fear. He looked at her then, not with pride, not with hunger, just presence. "Because it's yours," he said. "You chose it." She nodded. Later that night she braided her hair again, slower this time. Caleb curled in the furs beside her, warm and safe. Noan laid his blanket near, but not touching. But she shifted just slightly and placed the edge of her blanket over his. He didn't move, didn't ask, but he stayed, and that was everything. The wind howled outside the lodge like a memory trying to return, but inside the fire held steady, and so did she. Alandra no longer asked for permission to exist. She woke in the mornings with breath that didn't shake. She raised a child with laughter in his lungs. She sat by a fire that warmed without burning. And she loved a man who knew that real love never had to be taken. It was given freely, when the soul was ready. She was ready, not for vows or titles, but for a life that didn't hurt. A life she had chosen. At dawn, Alandra stood at the edge of the clearing, a worn cedar braid wrapped around her wrist, her name resting easy in her chest. The lodge behind her still slept, quiet and warm. Smoke curled from the chimney like a whisper. Inside, Caleb snuggled in the furs, his tiny hand clutching the wooden bear Noan had carved. And Noan himself, steady, present, the man who had never once reached for what wasn't offered, still breathed softly in the shadows, part of her world, but never consuming it. Alandra breathed in the morning, the air sharp and clean. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't bracing. She was awake. Alive. She walked down the path toward the stream, each step deliberate, the earth no longer unfamiliar beneath her soles. Her shoulders didn't hunch, her eyes didn't scan for threats. She simply walked, because it was hers to do. Noan was crouched by the water's edge, checking the lines he'd set the night before. When he looked up and saw her, he smiled, but didn't move toward her. He didn't ask why she came. She came because she wanted to. "I've been thinking," she said, settling onto a nearby stone. "Dangerous," he replied gently, his eyes warm. She smiled. "I used to think survival was enough. That if I wasn't being hit or starved or silenced, then I was safe." He said nothing, just waited. "But safety isn't the same as belonging," she continued. "It isn't the same as love." Noan unwrapped a piece of jerky and handed it to her without a word. She took it. "I never needed a ring," she said, "or a prayer, or a promise that came with a price." "I know," he said. She held out her wrist where the cedar braid rested. Worn now, weathered but still strong. This was enough. "It's still enough," he said quietly, "unless you want more." She turned to him then, eyes soft. "I want something I never had," she said. "Not to be kept, not to be rescued, just seen, chosen, every day." He nodded slowly, not owned, Never again, she whispered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, another braid, this one shorter, simple, made from the same cedar, but looped 3 times at the center. He didn't hand it to her. He placed it on the stone between them. This isn't a bond, he said. Not unless you choose to wear it. Alandra stared at it for a long time. Then she picked it up, looped it gently around her wrist beside the first one. It wasn't a replacement. It was a companion. I choose it, she said. Not because I need to be loved, but because I know I'm worthy of it. No one looked at her like she was a sunrise he'd waited for all winter. Then, let's call this home, he said. Not a place, not a promise. Just what we make, together. She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she reached for his hand, not to be led, not to be saved, but to walk beside him. When they returned to the lodge, Caleb jumped into her arms, laughing. Noan crouched and tousled the boy's hair, then looked up at her. I'll make breakfast, he said. Alandra chuckled. You always say that when something sacred just happened. He grinned. Because food makes everything real. Inside the lodge there were no witnesses, no oaths. Just warmth. Just a fire. Just love that didn't ask to be proven, only shared. And as Alandra braided her hair that evening, she no longer did it to look neat or strong. She did it because it felt like herself. She was not a possession, not a survivor, not a shadow. She was a woman who had chosen her name, her fire, and her peace, and in doing so had chosen love, on her own terms.